Well, hi, everybody. Happy darn CultureCast Day. Happy Tuesday. I am super excited to welcome Roberta Matuson to this CultureCast today. Welcome, Roberta. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm super excited to have you. And thank you for indulging with this play on song. I always love to mention my friend who created it. He's a fellow Nashvilleian and he is a producer and he created that song. So thank you, Julius Wilder, for doing that. And just reminding everybody who's on the Culture Cast, look, it's all about how can we as leaders and good citizens of our communities, whether it's within organizations, or the communities that we're a part of, how do we contribute to creating cultures where everyone can thrive? And this is what it's all about. And I was super excited that I had the chance to meet Roberta because she is a talent expert and, in fact, a talent maximizer. I mean, that is like, if you were to look her up, it's trademark, friends. So we're going to dig into that. And I think it's a really awesome insights and learnings on how you too can become your own talent maximizer. But before we do that, a couple of things. I know that on these talks while we are live, which we are now, and after the fact, we'll also post this. But during these talks, if you have any questions, since I do know a few of you who replied are folks that I've met over the last month or so, especially early in career, feel free to post any question and we'll take a look out for it and hopefully address it. So feel free to do that. And we're going to roll. So first of all, Roberta, and thank you, Dr. Joey Fawcett, for introducing me to you. He was on about a year ago on CultureCast. And before we get into why you are a talent maximizer, I loved when I first met you, the story about who was Roberta and what led you to this pathway of being an expert on talent. But let's hear about young Roberta first, and then your entree into the working world.
Okay, well, young Roberta was probably the worst boss you've ever met. Okay.
Oh, no.
And that's because when I was 24 years old, I went into work one day only to find out that my boss had been fired. And so I did what I thought any other 24-year-old would do. I asked for her job. And the president actually gave it to me. And so at 24 years old, I was tossed into the executive suite. And I was one of two women on the executive team, and definitely the youngest person on the executive team. And, when you're 24 years old or when you're young and confident, you think you know everything. At least that's my experience. I knew everything. And so I made a lot of mistakes. And, in retrospect, that's what I wrote about. I mean, in my newest book, Suddenly in Charge, I talk about how I failed to manage up. I failed to manage the people above me in the organization. I failed to build relationships across the organization. And eventually I got taken out by a wave I never saw coming.
Wow.
And I don't want that to happen to anyone else because it's not a pleasant experience.
So 24 years old. And if I recall, I won't say the company name, but I want to say it was in the real estate industry that you were working in. How did you land in that role? And was it kind of your first career out of college? And then what was that confidence where you're like, you know what? I can flip and do this. Let me do this.
Well, I was very experienced because, I had about 18 months of
Oh,
experience
jeez, right?
having worked in HR for a major retailer. And well, I think the answer to your second question is I'm from New York. I
Okay.
mean, why wouldn't they give me the job? I mean, when I say that, like I everyone would ask for this job who was in my position. And so I really didn't know any better. I've never suffered from imposter syndrome. In
Okay.
fact, I probably had the opposite problem. I thought maybe I was better than I actually was. But, I learned a lot and I hit the ground running, and I hired a lot of consultants to, educate me and help me create a world class human resources department for a major commercial real estate company.
Wow. All right. I want to unpack that a little bit. There's two things. The path of HR, like what led you to HR, first of all? I just want to understand that. What happened?
Well,
That
I actually got my degree in human resources
okay.
management from Northeastern University. And at the time, I think they were one of 5 schools in the country that even offered such a degree.
Yeah.
And it was probably more by default, like, well, I don't know what else I want to do, but this sounds good,
Yeah.
and so I went and did this.
I love it. But then you also created a profession out of it by the
Yeah.
second thing is too, and I love this, you and I might have talked about this, being 24 years old and having 18 months of deep experience to then go in and ask, right? And I love to not ever having this imposter syndrome. Like, what was that at 24 that you had that? And I get the whole New York thing, but what was that kept that kind of spirit or that fire that you're like, you know what, I can do this?
I think it's my personality. I mean, I've never been afraid to try something. I remember when I was 22 years old, I took a year off to help pay for my schooling because I paid for my own degree. And I was working as a file clerk in a law firm. And I think the scariest moment for me was I went in and I went to ask my boss, the owner of the firm, for a raise. And I remember I was making, I asked for like a $20 a week raise.
Wow.
And I was scared out of my mind. And he said yes. And then I thought, oh my gosh, like I didn't ask for enough. But you take baby steps, right? You go and you ask for this raise, even though you have no idea if you're going to get it. You
Yeah.
think you probably won't, and then you get it, and then you take another step and you ask for a director role and you get it.
Yeah.
So my advice is keep taking baby steps, right? And my mentor, and I think everyone should have a mentor, always says, no one is shooting at you.
That's right.
And it may feel like they are, but they're not. So if you take a risk and it doesn't work out, it's okay. You'll get back up and you'll try again.
Yeah, I love this. And actually, it's a great theme. And you and I talked about this, especially when you're early in career, first out of college, and that fearlessness, the theme that I get chatting with you. And I think what I've learned early on too in my career, that especially when you are young and, you're learning, there's, you have all this opportunity to learn from, either being knocked down and stepping up again, right? Like you can be fearless. Now is the time to do it, or that time in your career I think is a time to do it, and you're not going to get there unless you ask, right?
Yeah, yeah. And it does remind me this whole fearless thing,
Yeah.
if you're a skier and you go onto the slopes and you you see these 3-year-olds, I mean, my gosh, like they are going down the hill, they have no fear. And then you see these, 30, 40, or 50-year-olds, like, with their eyes wide open going, oh my God, I'm going to die. So like when you don't know any better, sometimes that's good.
Yeah, I agree. Although I'd say I was 24, 25 when I went in and asked for my boss's job at the time. And the chief HR officer said no. I mean, I went in there with a deck just saying, here's why I think I need the job, etc. And, he didn't say, I'll say he didn't say yes right away. He said no. And there was just a couple of other things, which then maybe 5 or 6 weeks later, he came back and said, all right, here's why it's a yes. I think it was
Mm.
also maybe there was a flaw in my plan that I kind of said, here's what I would do in the role. And I had to go back. And I think it's maybe taking a page out of your book, Suddenly in Charge, when it is about managing 360, right? So it's not just
Mm.
about presenting up, but it is about like, how do people experience you, your peers, as well as the people who you may be leading, so that they all feel like they're part of your success. And so,
Yes.
yeah. And so I love, though, that your president was kind of like, yeah, you can be the new head of HR. And the fact that you surrounded yourself with experts is pretty amazing.
Yes, and unlike you, I did not go in there with a deck.
Oh, okay.
It's like, no deck. You just go in and you just tell them why you should be the person hired. Sometimes when you do what you did, right, it worked in the end, but you're right. He saw a flaw, right? There
Yeah,
was one slide that was off.
that's right.
So I just go right in and ask.
Oh my gosh. Well, I love it. So I think about the wave that took you out. I mean, you had a good run,
I
right?
did.
And I also think about lessons learned too when you are one of just a couple of females on this leadership team. Any advice, especially being so new in career, that you could provide to our diverse leaders out there who are
Yeah.
like maybe holding themselves back because of that?
Well, I think what I really learned and that has stuck with me, and I do a lot of executive coaching. So when I coach people, I remind them, especially women and people of color, is the fact that, just because you have a seat at the table doesn't mean you have a voice. And so you really have to work on making sure you're heard.
Yeah,
I was just so excited, like they gave me a chair. And I had no idea like all this stuff was going on around me because I had no idea what was going on around me. But there's a lot of politics going on, and people are like, "Oh, I don't want to play that game." And I'm like,
yeah,
"Well, if you're in corporate America or in a nonprofit or a family business, you are in the game.
that's
So
right.
you better learn how to play it." And so those are some of the lessons I learned, that you can't be like, "Well, I'm just not going to play that game," because everyone around you is playing to win and you're out, right? You don't even
That's
know
right.
you're out.
Yeah, I love that advice too about just because you have a seat at the table or a ticket to the party, right? The game doesn't mean that you're in the game, like people, or that people are listening to you. And I think about early on too, a leader saying to me, stepping up into a new role, and he pulled me aside. His name was Cliff. I've actually had a couple leaders named Cliff, and I kept in touch with him a long time. But Cliff was great because he would say to me, hey, let's talk about how that meeting went. And I'd say, oh, yeah, it was really great. And I had a lot to say after the meeting, but apparently I didn't have a lot to say during the meeting. And what he would
Ah,
say is, what you said exactly just now, I think would have been more valuable in the meeting. And then he just said, um, when you speak up, I think people understand your point of view, they understand your opinion, and we miss out on that when it doesn't happen in
mm,
the room. And so I think that was his way of coaching me. And then also, I think just the way he led was, all right, next time I'll sit across the table from him. And if he knows that I am holding myself back, I mean, he would make a certain kind of like nod with his head. And I'm like,
mhm.
oh, okay, he knows that I'm thinking something. Just get out there and say it. Not going to be perfect. But I think that too, it's this whole action and behavior of declaring. And it's like this theme that I see with you, declaring that you want this job and go in there and just go ask for it. But then also declaring what you think in conversation so that you do have a seat at the table and your voice is heard, you know?
Yeah, it's so important. It really is. And, especially for women, I mean, you're at the table and everyone's talking over you, or somebody is, stealing your ideas. I mean, you've got to be ready. There should be no surprises. And that's why when I coach my clients, I'm like, okay, there's only three things that are going to happen in this meeting. What are they? And how are you going to react?
That's
Right?
right.
So it shouldn't be like, oh my God, like, where did that come from?
That's right. Yeah, I think you never want to be in a space of reacting. I think it is
Hmm.
about like going in there and what impact is it that you want to leave them with. So that's amazing. So you've written 4 books: Evergreen Talent. I know you just mentioned Suddenly in Charge, Managing Up, Down, and Succeeding All Around. And then 2 more: Talent Magnetism and The Magnetic Leader. So I think about that series of books, and I think I want to get into this topic. Like, let's just jump into um, evergreen talent as well as talent magnetism. And, when I was reminding people that we were jumping on a conversation today, I think about the challenge we are all having when I think about organizations. How do you motivate? How do you attract, motivate, retain, develop this next generation of leaders that are coming
Mm.
into the workplace? And I'd love to kind of set that as the context, but would love, in your experience, what have been tried and true, if you think about the high level process of what it means to kind of be a good talent magnet, to your organization, and how do you create that evergreen talent kind of life cycle for your organization? I'd love for you to jump into that.
Yes. Well, what I think is interesting is that the more things change, the more they stay the same, right?
Right.
And so when I'm asked to talk about the generations in the workplace, I will discuss all the differences. And then I go back to the real truth, which is, people are people and we really all want the same things, right? We all want to have the ability to work, autonomously. We all want to be respected. We all want to feel good about our work. So, I mean, we're not that different. And this
Yeah.
younger generation, I if I have the chance to come back, I'm going to come back as a millennial or a Gen Zer. I've got that made up already in my mind because these generations are people that are willing to step up and say what we were thinking
Yeah.
when we were, being treated
Yeah.
poorly or not getting what we needed. And so, my advice is to really think about, how would you like to be treated? If you're the leader, how would you really, or how are you being treated if you're being treated well? And how can I be like that for my people? And how can I make sure that when they come to work, they feel like they're growing where they're planted, so
Yeah.
they're not looking to grow somewhere else? How can I make sure that they feel fulfilled, that they think that they see an opportunity? And today we're seeing like less and less opportunities because there are less job opportunities and
Yeah.
people aren't like leaving like they were a year ago. And so we have to make work more interesting and we have to give people the opportunity to, move into a different department, do a temporary assignment. Like we have to make work interesting again.
That's right. I think you're underscoring just this natural definition of what it means to develop people. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if I think about, let me go back to what you said. We all are human. And I think at the end of the day, the more things change, things remain the same. And I still
Mm-hmm.
think there is this human aspect of how you treat people. And to be candid, I mean, my thoughts are, and I've said this in different audiences, look, we all lived through the pandemic. We all lived through how you work remotely, hybrid, what is productivity, all of that. And I always like to say, well, here's the good news and the opportunity coming out of COVID. The good news is, I think organizations realized, oh, wait, we have humans working at the center of everything. Like they are the engine, right? They are the ones creating the service or product. And I know, layer on top of that, AI has become a thing since then, but I still think at the center of all of it is humanity. And to your point, somehow we lose sight of that, And so when leaders think about, well, what's the biggest and best process I can create? I think what I love about your advice is, look, think about how you want to be treated as a human being. And everyone feels the need to be seen, heard. I mean, essentially what you said, valued for who they are. And then how do you create an environment where you're doing that for them, right? Where you are valuing and respecting your people, that they feel like they're contributing, that they feel like that their ideas can be heard in the company. But I think, what is it that holds leaders back? I mean, what do you think? I mean, it sounds really simple, but what's up with that? That it's not that simple.
Well, I think it is that simple, but I think the problem is this. I think that leaders today, they have so much on their plate that they don't have time to their job and the job of the positions that may have been cut. Okay. And so some of them have, like you and I, have been tossed into management
Yep.
with no experience. They've been given no development opportunities. They haven't been given a coach. They're just like, boom, you're a manager, now go manage. And, I don't know about you, but if a doctor was thrown into the operating room and had never operated before, and somebody said, go do surgery, like, I would figure out a way to get off that table
Right.
fast.
Right.
And so companies talk a good game. Oh, people are our most important assets. And yet when you look at it, when you look at the resources being dedicated to managers and leadership, it's small, if any. And that's discouraging.
Yeah, I agree. I actually just saw a former colleague from years ago, Jerry, just popped in a note there, growing people once you plant them, right? Growing while where they're planted, I think is really important. But I think to your point, leaders don't realize that when they step into, now I'm managing my people who were peers of mine. And I think about this in every context. It's the age old human resources challenge that I think all of us in HR have is, all right, I always use this saying, it's all fun and games until someone breaks up. And what I mean by that is, having worked in like multiple retail, entry level hourly environments where you're leading that. And especially when you see people get promoted up quickly because they need a key holder, and then they need, an assistant leader, and then an assistant manager, and then a manager, right? Or shift leader, assistant manager, and leader. And we promote people because technically they're excellent at what they do, but it's not because we promoted them for the social skills that I think it takes to become a leader. And so I agree with you that the resources are slim. And I think there's always this natural ability to go, that person has, natural skills, but you still need to augment them with skills. But then I want to flip it on to the talent side of the equation. You and I were also talking about how today I get that there's maybe less jobs available, or when I speak with this next generation, especially in tech coming in, they're worried about, am I going to realize my full potential? I just, spent 4-6 years in engineering, computer science, what have you. Literally, my nephew just graduated from computer science last month, and he's like, Auntie Marisa, am I going to have a career? And or all the other young people that I've spoken with. And what advice do you have as young people in their careers are building them, and now they're out there looking for a job, and it's not as easy as when it was just simple to apply for one?
Well, first of all, tell your nephew he'll be fine. My son is a software engineer. He's been out of school 2 years. He's fine.
Yeah.
He is not worried about AI. He is fine. So tell him he'll be fine. That's number one. I think that what it's important for today's people, young people in particular, to understand is that, you got to pay your dues. All right. It doesn't sound, like a lot of fun. And believe me, it stinks. My first job, I was working out of college. I was working for a major retailer as an employment coordinator. And my job was to hire the Easter Bunny. Okay.
Nice. That's
Okay.
actually
And
kind of fun.
oh, yes, in Houston, okay, where it's like 100 degrees in the shade. And you got to find somebody who's willing to walk around with this thing on their head, Okay. Don't even get me started about hiring Santa Claus. That was a whole another episode. But the point is, you take these jobs and you get experience, and they're not your forever jobs. And you can't be, and also the job market today, completely different than a year or two ago when your friends graduated college and were getting crazy job offers.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to come out of college, $80,000 a year. You have no experience.
Yeah.
That's not going to be your reality unless, like your nephew, you're a software engineer.
Yeah.
So I think that people have to just be really realistic and just say to themselves, this is the time for me to build skills, get some experience, figure out what I like, what I don't like, and then go from there, and not be like, well, this isn't the job that I thought I was going to have.
That's right. I think too, it's in addition to building some grit, right? So when I think about, I think you did tell me the story about hiring Santa as well. That's interesting. But like, we won't get into it. But you do have to take on, and I say this early on too, I think early on, but even all across my career, always saying yes to things that no one else will take on
Mm-hmm.
because it's an opportunity to learn. And I even think about young people when they're like, well, someday I want to be a chief HR officer, right? Like if they are on my team and I'm supporting them, like, how do you do that? And I think the first thing I say is exactly what you said, like, you've got to pay your dues, take on any role. But then I always say, too, everything that you hate about, like, if you want to be a generalist, like I think about being a chief people officer, that means you need to learn everything. Meaning, you don't have to be good at everything, but have a clue on how this whole employee experience, this whole life cycle connects from compensation to benefits to recruiting. Like you think about all of that and how sometimes people say, well, I just need to get promoted. And it's kind of like, well, you need to learn all the different technical skills that will give you context for how it all comes together over time.
Very, very true. And the other thing that I
Yeah.
did, and you have to be willing to, make some sacrifices. I went to school at night for my MBA, and I did that for several reasons. One, I knew that I had to level the playing field because, again, here I was in the executive suite with a bunch of really smart people who were lawyers and MBAs and whatever else they were, right? And I knew HR, but I really didn't know the business side of
Yeah.
things. And so that was a problem if you don't know that part. And so, I did this at night. And so I sacrificed a lot. And I made that decision. So if you really want to move up, then you have to consider, will a graduate degree help me? And it was also because I wanted to continue learning. And for
Yeah.
me, that was the key. It wasn't so much, the MBA. It was, hey, I'm learning a lot here. So
Oh my gosh, I feel like you're my cousin who lived on the other coast. I grew up, on the West Coast in Southern California. Same thing. My first job out of college had a very rich, and I know today everyone's kind of come full circle on it, very rich tuition reimbursement program. And I went back and got my executive MBA, and it was going nights and weekends, like the
mhm.
class load that I had. And whether or not the MBA was relevant for what I did for the rest of my career, I think what was super relevant is what you said. It's getting that broader business perspective. And I think maybe that's the foundation that really helped kind of help me move forward in that here I was learning alongside other leaders who were in sales and marketing and finance. And because I was curious and they're like, oh, you're the HR person in the room, they'll want to tell me all their problems. Totally fine. I guess when you're in HR, you've got to be down with OPP, other people's problems. But what I learned from it was speaking their language and
Mhm.
seeing what was important to them and their reality of their work situation. Because, of course, in the MBA program, we had a cohort, we went through these classes together.
Mhm.
And it was a great way of actually not always thinking with the HR hat on and really looking at it and defining the business problem. So I love that you say that because I feel
Yeah.
like that also helps you get beyond the silo that you sit in, which is whatever trade that you're in. And so,
Absolutely. And
yeah,
it's also a confidence booster. It's like, oh, well, I have an MBA. Like, I know what I'm talking
yeah,
about, right? As opposed to being in a meeting going, well, I don't really know. These people, they all have MBAs and their doctorates or whatever. I know nothing, So especially when that bolster, you need that boost. It's like keep your education level high. And like you said, I mean, my company paid for my MBA.
yeah.
but you have to ask sometimes. And even though the rules say like they won't, if they've got you earmarked for a certain role, you might be able to negotiate that. Or if they say, we're not going to be able to give you a great pay raise this year, you say, you know what? I'd rather have you pay for, my MBA classes at night. Would you consider that?
That
And
is,
of course,
yeah.
they have no idea how much that costs. So they're like, yeah.
That is such a good tip. I mean, take note, people, if you're hearing this. I love that. And actually, I've had people on my team come to me in the various decades where have been working. And like, you're right, you go through salary freezes, you go through like, or sometimes you might have a flexibility on um, stay bonuses, for example,
Mm-hmm.
in the form of, well, if I can't get this kind of sign on or stay bonus or this kind of raise, would you consider investing in my development? I love
Mm-hmm.
that. And that way, and these days too, whether it's that next degree or it's certification, because I think there's a lot of opportunities now with skill-based hiring that you may not have that experience, but if you have that experience plus certification, that's a way that a company can help you creatively get there if the resources are slim. I love that idea.
Well, if you have to choose, get the MBA,
Yeah,
okay?
I hear you. I
Because
hear
the
you.
certifications in the real world, they don't mean a lot. So go for go for the best that you can get. And then if you have to, move on to the next thing.
That's right. But I'm talking too about no matter where you're starting from, whether you're undergrad moving to your MBA or you're an hourly employee making your way and eventually to that 4-year degree, just ask. Like that is an awesome benefit. So that's pretty amazing. Now I want to get into the nitty gritty of finding your hustle, right? So what I mean by that is everyone's out there hustling, trying to be the best candidate, trying to be the final candidate. To be considered, to be hired for a job. And I want to go back to what you said. The more things change, the more stay the same. In your experience, what gives human beings, job seekers, the edge over anybody else? Knowing like now AI and technology is also helping to screen out people if you're a larger organization. But I'd love your thoughts on that too.
Okay, again,
Yeah.
this has not changed. It's all who you know. Okay. I mean, it is all your network. And that might be discouraging for young people who don't have a network yet or don't think they do. But, if you've gone to college or university, you have a huge network. It's called your alumni network. I know that if anybody, and if you're listening and you went to Northeastern or the University of Houston, and you want to reach out to me, I will take your call. So, it's really all about who you know, and it's also about being disciplined and resilient because it is tough out there.
That's right. And actually, I see that Jerry, and actually, Jerry, we can talk, but offline. But I love this question about all types of demographics, how they feel impossible to break through this online application process. And how can people share their potential when they feel like, hey, look, they were not even selected by the algorithm, right?
Oh, she is correct.
Yeah.
This is not like they're not just feeling it. It's very true. And that's why it really goes back to networking and reaching out to people who might be at the level you're interested in moving into the company. A lot of people think networking is about like, oh, I have to reach the CEO. No,
Yeah.
you really want to reach people who are at your level or one level above and just ask if they might be willing to take a few minutes to have an informational interview with you. And by informational interview, this is what we mean. It's an
Yes.
opportunity for you to learn about the company, learn about their career path. It is not a time for you to ask them for a job or to refer you. And when you start to build these relationships, and you can do this online, you will get to a place where an opportunity opens up and they're like, you know what? I remember talking to that person. I'm going to reach out and let them know we have an opening. And here's the other thing that I think it's important to understand. A lot of companies have employee referral programs where
Yes.
if an employee refers someone, they get a bonus. So don't think like, oh, I don't really want to bother them. Like you could be giving them a wonderful holiday bonus because
Right.
they're going to get paid some big bucks because they referred you and you were hired. So you're doing them a favor.
Yeah, I love that. I love that tip on networking. And actually, it speaks to, it's one thing to submit an online application. And I think that's the first step. That can't be the only step. So, to your point, and especially these days, it's actually more advantageous because of tools like LinkedIn, right? Even tools
Mhm.
like Instagram or whatever, and you can reach out to people directly. And I love this whole notion of it's not only the network that you know, so making sure you tap into your alumni network, your friends, your family, and who they might know. But if you don't know them, I do love this idea of actually for the company and or the position that you're targeting, try and connect with somebody, like literally link in with them if you don't already know them. And I'd love to add on and see what you think. Actually, one of my colleagues and I were talking about this. Like, we've been through talent acquisition for decades. You met him, Mike. And I think about the one thing that will also get you to the yes, I will spend 15 or 20 minutes with you is not only are you tapping into, hi, I'm Marisa Andrada and I'd love to link in with you, but actually do your homework. And
Hmm.
when you're researching that person who you might want to be, I know we don't call it friending on LinkedIn, but who you want to get linked in with on LinkedIn, like even a good one liner or two about what you've researched on that human being that now you want to become friends with or connected with on LinkedIn in that intro note. I think it's about framing that one or two just really pithy. Hey, here's what I admire. Here's what I've observed, or I noticed this, or congratulations on XYZ. I mean, there's a lot of accolades out there. There's people also talk about what they're excited about on their own LinkedIn profile. So even just researching that and responding to that and about what can I learn? I'd love to learn from you. And that I think is a miss sometimes from the blind, hey, I want to LinkedIn with you, right?
Well, well, kudos to you for
Yeah,
even suggesting a note because I get people all the time wanting to connect with me, and without a note, I'm like, X. Like I don't know who you are. I don't know why we should connect. There's no, you haven't given me any information. You just clicked on a link that was on there, and you want to connect. And people may not know this, but LinkedIn does have a limit as to the number of connections you can have.
yeah,
It For some people it may sound pretty high, but when you're a highly visible person, you kind of have to be, more cautious because you don't want to reach that level and then not be able to connect with people that you want to connect with. But I think it's really important to put together a note. I do a lot of job search coaching, and I make sure my clients have a very succinct, people don't have time to read like, three. When we started out, you gave them 3 paragraphs, like,
right.
how are you, blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah.
yeah, yeah.
Here's about me, and then what I'm looking for. This isn't about you. This is about them
Yeah.
and having an opportunity to connect and start a relationship. That's what this is about.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, I love that. You're right. I just assume that if you're cold reaching out to somebody, doing that without a note, and to your point, it's not me, it's you. It's really about you, right? So when you are making that connection, I think about the other way. Remember like the old days when it's like, oh, I'm going to break up with you. It's not you, it's me. Well, on the entry point, hey, it's not me, it's you. Like I want to get to know you. And so I think that's such a smart way to get in there and like to highlight for people. That's the kind of networking that we're talking about to connect those dots. And to also not just think one reach out is fine. Do your research, right? There's a few people out there who I'm sure you can connect into, whether it's the company or the kind of role that you want to do that informational interview. Like it's really all learning.
Yeah, and it's also really good to join some of the groups on LinkedIn. So maybe it's a group of people who are in filmmaking. because there now you all have something in common. So then when
Yeah.
then you get to see the list and you're like, oh, that person sounds interesting. And then you reach out to them, hey, you and I are both in the young filmmakers group on LinkedIn. I've noticed some of your posts and really thought they were compelling. Loved what you had to say about this. Would love to connect.
Yeah, that is such a good tip. I love that. And this, find other people in the same boat as you or who you want to be in their boat. I love that. And that way you can also get the vibe of what's going on in that community and be included in things that are happening. I think that's a great tip for those who are like, well, I'm not even getting responses back on, the online application, because reality is I don't think you will. Like, I
You
think
won't.
there's
You won't.
always there's always a differentiator. You have to differentiate yourself if you don't already know somebody on the inside. It's that whole point that you talked about. Get out there and network, right?
And
And
some of these jobs, they don't exist because the company doesn't take them down because they're like, oh, maybe we have high turnover,
yeah,
so there may not even be a job. That's number one. Number two, they may have to post just to show everyone they're posting, but the job is really going to an internal candidate. Number three, if you do go on LinkedIn, you can see, oh, there's already been 500 applicants for this
yeah,
job. So, but what you really do need to do, if you're serious about your job search, you do need to have LinkedIn Premium. You just have to
okay.
pay the bucks and you got to get it because it's really, it's your job search and it's really important.
Yeah, those are all valid tips in terms of just making sure that you are spot on and primed to get the role. I love that. And you're right. I think I always forget about that. Hey, oftentimes the role just was never taken down. And or you're right, if there's an internal candidate, making sure that you understand who else is out there before that leader ends up selecting the candidate. They might even bring you into the fold, but at the end of the day, there is an internal candidate that was also vying for the position. And then I want to just get one kind of finer layer, that once you are in the position where, okay, you've got through, the application process, you got through the screening process, and now you're invited for an interview, what tips or tricks, I think just building on what we've been talking about, should people be prepared to do now that they're in the door, right? Yes, their experience is going to speak for themselves, but those human things that I think sometimes job seekers, and I'm asking you as a talent leader and an HR leader, what you've seen, like what do people need to make sure that they're doing, that they actually do make an impression when they're finally in that interview?
Okay, well, I don't think that your resume speaks for itself. And I don't think that because the person who you're meeting with has obviously gone through hundreds of
Yeah,
resumes. So they don't even know. It's like, okay, next. And so your resume is in front of them, like, yeah. I mean, it's up to you to demonstrate why you're the best person for this job. So don't think, oh, it's in my resume. They know.
right.
They know that I speak 5 languages, and this is a position for a global company. They know that it's on my resume. Yeah, it's all the way at the end, and they read that 3 weeks ago, and they've already had 10 interviews. So you got to tell them, and you have to shamelessly promote yourself. And so when they ask you a question, you have to say, that's a great question. When I was learning how to speak Portuguese, because I needed to communicate with our clients in Portugal and South America, I
Yeah.
faced this similar problem. Oh, you speak Portuguese? Well, yeah, I speak Portuguese and 4 other
And right.
languages. Don't be afraid to sound impressive.
Yeah, right. I love that. And I love that too. I know people think that resumes speak for themselves. They could in a good way and in a really bad way. And what I mean by that is you've already pointed it out, like resumes, people speak in sound bites and read in headlines, right? And so if they're not getting kind of the key takeaway of who you are and what you're all about, and your introduction of how you kind of set up your resume, and then on each of the positions and skills that you list, if you're not tying that to how did that drive business outcomes, that's kind of a
Mm,
tip that I would give. So I'll say this, what drives me crazy is when I read resume after resume and it looks like, oh, you just pasted your old job description into that, like in this company, I did this. And then in this company, I did this, right? And it literally is a job description. It doesn't differentiate really how you contributed and how that contributed to the growth of the company or whatever happened in the company while you were in that role. What was it that you specifically did that led to XYZ for the company? And I think that helps you stand out, in addition to, yes, the skills, not just assuming that people are going to read at some point in your resume, that you also have these skills that make you different, right, than anybody
Right.
else.
Right. And you have to, it's always about storytelling, right? You remembered the story I told you when I was suddenly in
Yes.
charge. If I just said to you, "Oh, I was an executive when I was 24." Oh, okay, that's nice. You might not have remembered that, but you remembered a few of the stories that you and I talked about previously. So, it is about stories, and at the end of the day, when they're done assessing the candidates, all 10 or 20 of them,
Yeah.
they're like, I remember that person who, taught themselves how to speak Portuguese. We want
Yes.
somebody who's a self learner, somebody who's going to go the extra mile. That's the candidate that's going to stand out, not the person who maybe speaks 10 languages, but nobody knows.
I love that. And I love what you're hitting on too. Ultimately, it is about your ability to tell your story, because people are going to remember that, right? So, who are you? What are you all about? Why is it that you want this role? And how does that contribute to all the other successes you've had in your career? People will remember you more than the others when it comes from this authentic place of, let me tell you the story of what, why I was in this role, what I learned from it, and why I'm excited about this role. It all has to build onto that.
Mm.
I do love the idea of the ability to tell your story. No one else is going to be able to do it, period. Right. From your perspective. And then I think the other piece that I'd love to get your thoughts on, going back to, it's not me, it's you. I know it drives me crazy when I then have done a lot of listening as the interviewer, right? Or the hiring leader. And then I toss it back and say, well, what questions do you have? What can I address for you? And the candidate goes, oh, I think you've answered all of them. Or I this has been a great interview. I don't have any questions.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on that? Because I know I have a point of view, which is what?
Eh. Okay, so I'm going to give your listeners what I call my $1,000,000 question, okay? And
Right?
you're going to want to watch this again so that you get it exactly right. The one question you absolutely must ask is there anything in my background that gives you pause? And then be quiet. All right? And so this is your opportunity to overcome whatever objection is going on in their mind. And so they might think, well, actually, it doesn't look like you have experience, creating social media videos.
Yeah.
And you say one of two things. That's exactly why you need me, because you got a ton of people here who know how to create them. They just don't know how
Yeah.
to do X, Y, and Z. Or you say, hey, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I did a lot of that when I was working as the leader on our college project. And we had to create a social media campaign for our marketing, our new product that we developed in our marketing class. And, we actually, out of a class of 300 people, took first place. Like, now you get to overcome, as opposed to when the hiring manager goes back and like, oh, I really liked him, but he has no experience doing
Yeah.
this.
I love that question. Is there anything about my background that would give you pause? And by the way, don't wait until the end of the interview, because what if, they have allotted 45 minutes, an hour, and they need to be out of there at the top of the hour or on the dot at the certain minute. And you've asked this question at the very end. And so it's hard to get in that conversation until, like, again, conversationally, maybe even bring it back earlier, right? If you're
I like
also
that.
sensing that with somebody, if they're just like, don't know, if Marisa has that skill. Look, I don't have time to tell the story, but I do recall a final interview that I had been in with like the CEO of a company, one of the companies that I was a part of. And he's just like, hey, it's down to you and this other candidate. He's got XYZ experience, blah, 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 in retail. You're light in that, et cetera, et cetera. Why would I hire you over him? Right. And that was the way he started the interview. And I kind of went, all right, well, I may not have all this experience in XYZ retail. And here's what I've learned. I think I probably met with 15 people in that interview process over a period of months. And what I said was, my understanding is what you're trying to do at this company is something completely different, complete rehaul and innovation. And if you're to hire someone with that depth of experience, you would have found them by now. Here's
I like
why.
that.
Yeah, and I just kind of said, here's why I think I'm a final candidate. And then got into the diverse set of experiences that have not been experienced yet in this company. And I'm wrapping this all up with, you've got to find that gumption, the grit that you build early on in your career, because you can also be easily invited to, walk out that door. It's like, well, it said in a respectful way.
That's a tough one, though. I got to admit, I'd be like, okay, I could first start out with that's exactly why you should hire me. Or then why are you talking to me?
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, there's no way you're bringing me back after 15 interviews and then you're setting this up. But I think I love that idea. So anyone listening to this, get in there and be confident to ask that question sooner rather than later. Because I'd hate for you to miss out on that opportunity if it's like 5 minutes before the end and they really need to leave. And then you're kind of SOL. And then your follow-up email is what? Your follow-up note is what? Right? It's kind of like, oh, I forgot the chance to do this. And I think that's a really good thing. And what I would also add is, not unlike the homework and hopefully what you did to network on your way in, look, there's current events happening at these companies that companies that you're interviewing with and for. Like, ask them a question about them, right? Like, you read about this thing that happened, the news for this company. What are your thoughts on that? Or I noticed this about you recently, get in there and ask that question too, and make it personal. I think what I've seen, quite honestly, especially, although I would love to come back, although I'd like to think that I lived as a millennial and a Gen Z back in the day and had those traits, but then maybe not. But go in there and do that homework too, because that's going to hold you back from people going, well, there is a little bit of that human connection that I think is really important in these interviews.
Yeah. And it's crazy, but they're looking for opportunities not to hire you. And a question that you might be asked, and you might be like, well, who cares? But they do care, is, well, what's our stock price today?
Right.
You can look that up right now. I mean, before you walk into that interview and just say, well, I know you're in the high 30s as of this morning.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Or, well, wait a minute, you're not publicly traded. How would I know that? Trick question.
Yeah, right. No, those are such good tips and tricks, Roberta. Oh my gosh, I feel like I know we're coming to the top of the hour, but look, all of these things you can find. I know that you also help job seekers. So as a coach, you can dive in there with them if they want to find you, and or you have 4 books that are just a treasure trove of, I'm going to call it the social skills of finding people, and also for you finding a job. I think it's really important to tap into those. But I do want to get to some core questions that I always love to hear my experts, my guests, when I talk with them on CultureCast. How do you define culture? And how does that relate to everything we've been talking about right now around job seeking and finding talent?
Well, I define culture as a shared set of values and beliefs. And so when you're looking to hire people, you want to hire people who do share your organization's values. And when you're looking for a job, you want to find an organization where your values are honored, right? You don't want to be in a situation where, they're all over on this side and you're over here and you're just not seeing eye to eye on things. So that's how I define it.
I love that. And I think it's a great way to coach people through don't just take any old opportunity. At the end of the day, companies are going to hire for purpose and values, like aligned purpose and values. And at the same time, I know one of my team members, former team members who now works at a beauty company. I remember when she was like, walk through your career. And I told her the point where I finally, hey, I'm going to join this company because I believe that the company has this purpose that I believe in, our mission. And then the leaders that I know I'm going to go work with and for, that we have aligned not only values, like I feel like my values fit within the company, but I also felt like my values align with them personally.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in doing so, that's where I had the chance to really thrive, and grow in my career. And so I love that you say that in the context of culture and in finding a job and seeking key people. Now, before we leave, I always love to ask other pop culture questions, like, what are you loving these days? So what are you reading, listening to, eating, or even fashion wise? Like, what are you into these days, Roberta?
Oh, I'm a Swiftie.
Are
What
you
can
a
I tell you?
Swiftie?
Oh, in and out
Oh my
throughout.
goodness.
I've seen her on both coasts last year. I was in LA.
Oh my God. That is so
So,
cool.
and now, I have a personal trainer and he's a young guy. And now he and I are rocking to Taylor, this morning working out.
Oh
So,
my gosh. Yeah, I can see that. I love it. And you're probably cool mom friend of the year for being
oh, I
on both
am.
coasts to see Taylor or being a
And, and,
Swiftie.
and taking her daughter, yes.
Oh my gosh.
Although my daughter did take me to one show. So,
Okay. What a treat.
but I just look at her, Taylor, and you're talking about culture and values. And I'm like, she's a great example for all women and men of how to be a good human and what is
Yeah.
possible.
I love that. It's so funny that you mentioned that. My husband and I made this new friend who accompanied us on a trip that we had overseas. And he was just telling me about how much of a Swiftie he was and how, talk about culture and Taylor Swift creating culture, how he can think about his evolution in life as it relates to, you know, the anthology of Taylor Swift, like the different songs and how it speaks to him and help kind of mold and help him really. And he's this amazing, successful young guy, right? And I'm like, wow, Taylor Swift created that for you. That's amazing. So Roberta, you are on the cutting edge. I love
I
that.
am.
And plus with the lavender back there too, kind of Swifty vibes, the mom
Definitely
behind you.
lavender haze.
Right? Swifty vibes. All right. Before we wrap, how can people get a hold of you? What's the best way to get a hold of Roberta?
They can go to my website, matchisonconsulting.com.
Okay.
They can go to LinkedIn and send me a message if they would like to connect and say that they heard you and I speak today. They can follow me on X at Matchison, or they can just email me. I actually respond to my own emails at
Oh, wow.
roberta@matchisonconsulting.com.
I love it. We will put all of that information in the show notes. Roberta, you are amazing. I am loving all of these excellent tips that I also am going to invite people. Hey, look, if you go and use any of these tips that you've learned from Roberta today, please send her a note and let her and thank her.
That'd be
Everybody,
cool.
please do that. That would be amazing. Talk about networking. Get in there. So, all right. Well, I'm going to just welcome you to enjoy the rest of your summer, Roberta. Thank you so
Thank you.
much for joining and for really all the wisdom that I think a lot of people here will have a step in their hustle or extra hustle in their hustle, getting their next hustle. So I'm excited about it. Thank you so much. And everybody, hopefully we will see you next week. I think my next CultureCast is a week from now, same time, same channel, with another culture leader by the name of Minette Norman. So everybody, ciao for now. Have a great day. And thank you, Roberta.
Thank you.